The sun had barely risen over the wide, dusty plains, yet the rancher was already at work. His days began before the world was fully awake, and they ended long after the stars had claimed the sky. He lived a life of routine, mending fences, tending cattle, and riding across endless acres of land. From the outside, his ranch seemed strong and alive, but inside his small wooden house, silence was the only companion he had known for years. The townsfolk often called him the lonely rancher. It wasn't out of cruelty, but because everyone could see it. His isolation clung to him like a shadow. At gatherings in town, he stood off to the side, offering polite nods but never lingering. When asked about his family, he would only smile faintly and change the subject. No one pressed him too hard. His eyes told a story of a man who had once loved and lost. Some said he had been engaged long ago, but tragedy struck before the wedding. Bells could ever ring. Others whispered he had once dreamed of children, but life, cruel and unforgiving, never granted him the chance. Whatever the truth, he carried his sorrow quietly. The only thing that kept him moving was the land he had poured his sweat into. Each morning, as he walked the pastures, he would sometimes pause to watch the horizon. He'd see families traveling together in wagons, hear the laughter of children from neighboring farms, and feel a hollow ache in his chest. He longed for that kind of life, for the warmth of a family table, for the sound of little feet running through the house. But he told himself those dreams were no longer meant for him. Time had passed him by. His house reflected his solitude. A single chair at the dining table. One plate, one cup, one fork neatly washed and placed back after every meal. The rocking chair on the porch creaked in the evening wind, but no one sat beside him. The rooms were neat, but empty, as if waiting for a life that never came. And yet, despite the weight of loneliness, the rancher had a kind heart. He cared for stray animals that wandered onto his land, leaving food out for them even when money was tight. He treated his ranch hands fairly, always paying them before keeping a cent for himself. He had built a life of hard work and decency, but no one to share it with. Still, deep within, a small flicker of hope remained. He never spoke of it, but at night, when he laid his hat on the table and stared into the quiet, he often imagined what it would feel like to hold a child in his arms. To hear someone call him father, to no longer eat his meals in silence. He never expected that hope to come true. But fate has a way of surprising those who wait the longest. And soon, the lonely rancher's life was about to change forever. The young woman's life had never been easy. From the moment she could walk, she was burdened with responsibilities that should never fall upon a child's shoulders. Her mother was a hard woman, not because life had made her so, but because greed and selfishness had hardened her heart. Where most mothers nurture and protect, hers only took and demanded. Growing up, she did everything she could to earn her mother's love. She cleaned, cooked, and worked in the fields until her hands blistered. Whenever her mother scolded or struck her, she told herself, "If I try harder, maybe one day she'll be proud of me." But that day never came. When she was older, her mother began treating her less like a daughter and more like a servant. She wasn't allowed to enjoy the laughter of other girls her age. She had no chance to go to school or learn about the world. Every ounce of her energy went into pleasing a mother who never once said the words, "I love you." Then, life took another cruel turn. She found herself pregnant. The father, a young man who had promised her affection and safety, vanished the moment he learned of the child. For a brief moment, she thought perhaps her mother would finally protect her, finally show compassion in her most vulnerable time. But instead, her mother's disappointment turned into disgust. "You've ruined yourself," the older woman spat, her eyes sharp as knives. "And now you'll ruin me. Who would ever want you now?" The young woman cried, begging for understanding. But there was none. Every day of her pregnancy was filled with her mother's bitterness. Meals grew smaller. The house grew colder, and each cruel word sank deeper into her already fragile heart. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. One morning, her mother told her to dress and come along. Thinking perhaps they were heading to the market, she obeyed. But, as they walked, unease filled her. Her mother's grip was tight, her face unreadable. Finally, they arrived at a place where a few rough men waited. Their eyes lingered too long on her swollen belly, and a chill swept over her. The young woman's heart pounded. She turned to her mother, searching for answers, but what she saw was worse than any nightmare. Her mother stood tall, chin raised as she spoke. "She's no use to me anymore. Take her, do what you will, just make sure I get my share." The words shattered her. Sold by her own mother. Not protected, not defended, sold like she was nothing more than livestock. The men exchanged coins, and before the young woman could even scream, her mother turned away, cold and indifferent. She did not look back. She did not hesitate. She walked away as though her daughter had never existed. Tears blurred the young woman's vision. Her legs trembled beneath her. She wanted to cry out, to beg, to run, but where could she go? She was alone, carrying a child, and now handed over to strangers who saw her as property. As the men led her away, despair crushed her chest. She pressed her hands to her belly, whispering through sobs, "I'll protect you. I promise." Even if the world abandoned her, she would not abandon the life growing inside her. That night, as she lay in a cold corner of a stranger's wagon, she thought of everything she had lost. The chance at a mother's love, the hope of raising her child in safety, the dignity of being seen as a human being, all stolen by the very person who should have been her shelter. And yet, even in the darkest hour, a spark of resilience refused to die. She clung to the thought of her unborn baby. Perhaps she could endure this nightmare if it meant her child could have a chance at a better life. What she didn't know was that fate was already moving pieces into place. Her path was about to cross with someone she had never imagined, a lonely rancher with wounds of his own. He did not yet know it, but her pain would soon change his world, and his kindness would change hers. The rancher had not planned on riding into town that day. He preferred the quiet of his land, the rhythm of hooves against the earth, the wind that carried no judgment. But a broken wagon wheel on one of his supply carts forced him to make the trip. As he approached the marketplace, he felt the usual unease. Townsfolk looked at him with a mix of respect and curiosity. They knew him as the hard-working rancher who lived alone, the man who never joined in celebrations or dances. Today, though, he noticed whispers that were not about him. A crowd had gathered near the far end of the street, voices sharp with cruelty and greed. Drawn by instinct more than interest, he steered his horse closer. And that's when he saw her. A young woman, heavily pregnant, stood with her head bowed, her dark hair tangled and her face pale. Two rough men tugged at her arm as if she were a prize animal. The rancher's jaw tightened. The way they handled her, the way the crowd looked on with either pity or scorn, it stirred something deep inside him. And then he saw the older woman standing nearby, arms crossed, bargaining with a sneer. The words cut through the noise. "She's no good to me. Now you want her, pay up." The rancher froze. His stomach turned at the realization. This wasn't trade for goods or animals. This was a daughter being sold like a sack of grain. The young woman's eyes flicked up for a moment and their gazes met. In that instant, he saw everything: fear, shame, exhaustion, and a fragile thread of hope she could barely hold on to. He had seen broken horses with more fight left in them, but here was a human soul crumbling before his eyes. The rancher dismounted, pushing through the small crowd. "What's happening here?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying weight. The older woman, clearly the mother, looked him over with cold eyes. "She's pregnant, useless, and I've no interest in feeding her anymore. I'm selling her. To them." "Why? You interested?" The rancher's fists clenched. He looked again at the girl, who flinched at every harsh movement of the men around her. Something in him broke open, a memory of dreams long buried, of wanting a family, of longing for something more than silence at his table. "I'll take her," he said firmly. The mother smirked, thinking she'd found another buyer, She named a price without hesitation. The rancher handed over the coins, his hands shaking not from fear but from anger at what had just transpired. The men released her annoyed but satisfied with the trade. The young woman, however, stiffened. She looked at him with wide, mistrusting eyes. To her, this was no rescue. It was just another exchange, another set of hands to own her. As the crowd dispersed, muttering their judgments, the rancher gently placed his hand on the reins of his horse. "You'll come with me," he said softly, though the words sounded more like an order than he intended. "You're safe now." She drew back, her voice trembling. "Safe? You bought me. Just like them." The rancher paused, guilt washing over him. He crouched slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I don't want to own you. I just couldn't stand by and watch. You can stay on my ranch, eat, rest. No one will hurt you there. Not while I'm breathing." Her lips quivered, her eyes brimming with disbelief. She wanted to believe him, but years of betrayal and the cruelty of her own mother had buried her trust deep. Still, when he offered his hand to help her onto the horse, she hesitated only a moment before taking it. Her steps were shaky, her body weak from hunger and stress, but he supported her gently, as though she were made of glass. The ride back to the ranch was silent. She clutched her belly protectively, her mind racing with fears of what awaited her in this man's home. The rancher, too, was lost in thought. He had acted on instinct, driven by anger and compassion, but now questions filled him. Could he truly protect her? Could he shoulder the responsibility of not just her but the child she carried? When they reached his land, he helped her down carefully, guiding her into the quiet wooden house. She looked around. One chair, one table, a room that spoke of loneliness. For a moment she wondered if she had simply stepped into another prison. The rancher cleared his throat, awkward but sincere. "You're free here," he said. "I don't expect anything from you. Rest, eat. That's all I ask." Her eyes narrowed, still doubtful, but the exhaustion in her body was too strong to argue. She sank into the chair, clutching her belly, and whispered so faintly he almost didn't hear, "No one's ever wanted me safe before." The rancher turned away, his throat tight. He didn't respond, but in his heart, he made a silent vow. He would prove to her that this time was different. The days that followed were filled with silence. The young woman spoke little, answering questions with only a nod or a shake of her head. She moved carefully, always watching the rancher as if waiting for him to reveal some hidden cruelty. Trust, after all, had never come easily to her. It had always been broken. The rancher, sensing her fear, gave her space. He made no demands, no harsh orders. Instead, he focused on the small things, preparing meals, leaving water by her bedside, making sure her chair by the fire was the warmest in the house. He wasn't a man of many words, but his actions spoke for him. On the second morning, he found her outside near the corral, staring at the horses. She looked so small standing there, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "Do you like them?" he asked gently. She startled at his voice, then nodded. "They're free," she whispered. "No one tells them where to go." The rancher studied her expression and understood. "They're free because someone cares for them," he said softly. "They run strong because they're safe." For the first time, she looked at him directly, as if testing his words. He didn't push further, but something in her eyes flickered, a spark of curiosity, maybe even the beginning of belief. Gradually, she began to move through the house as though it belonged to her, though cautiously. She swept the floor one morning, unasked. Another day, she cooked a small pot of soup, setting it shyly on the table before retreating. The rancher never made a show of it. He simply thanked her and ate, treating her contributions as though they were the most natural thing in the world. The ranch, once silent, began to shift with her presence. Her laughter, rare, soft, and fleeting, sometimes drifted from the kitchen when the cat batted at a loose string. The sound was like a fragile bird taking flight, and each time the rancher's chest ached with a feeling he hadn't known in years. Hope. He also noticed how her strength returned slowly. The hollowness in her cheek softened as she ate well. Her steps grew steadier, though she still carried the heaviness of her past in her eyes. The rancher never asked about her mother, never forced her to speak of the betrayal. He knew some wounds were too deep to reopen. Instead, he showed her the rhythms of ranch life. He guided her hand gently when she offered to feed the chickens. He let her sit on the porch and hold the reins as he led the horse in circles. She was hesitant, even fearful at first, but the animals seemed to calm her. They trusted easily, and little by little, their trust taught her to trust as well. One evening, as the sky turned gold, she sat on the porch, watching the horizon. The rancher brought her a blanket, laying it over her shoulders. She looked at him, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly. He frowned. "Do what?" "Buy me." Her voice cracked on the word. "Why would you waste your money on someone like me?" The rancher sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the field stretching endlessly ahead. "Because no one deserves to be treated the way they treated you. I couldn't just stand there." She studied him, searching his face for deceit, but found none. His voice carried no pity, only quiet conviction. Her lips trembled and she looked away quickly, hiding the tears that threatened to fall. That night, when she lay in bed, she placed her hands on her belly and whispered to the child, Maybe this time will be different." From then on, something shifted. Her mistrust didn't vanish overnight, but cracks began to appear in the wall she had built. She smiled more often. She asked small questions about the ranch, how many cattle he owned, how long he had lived here, what winters were like. Each question was a step closer, and though he didn't say it aloud, the rancher felt the change too. His house no longer echoed with emptiness. His meals were no longer taken in silence, and sometimes when he saw her resting by the fire with her hands on her belly, he imagined a future that once seemed impossible. The lonely rancher and the abandoned woman were slowly becoming something neither of them had expected. Companions, and, in that fragile companionship, a seed of trust was beginning to grow. Trust was slowly blooming between them, but fragile trust is easily shaken. The rancher and the young woman had begun to find comfort in each other's presence, yet both carried scars that whispered doubts in the quiet hours of the night. For the young woman, the fear never fully left. She often woke in the dark, clutching her belly, certain that at any moment she would be abandoned again. Sometimes she dreamed of her mother's face, twisted with disdain, her words echoing, "You're useless. No one will ever want you." She would wake with tears on her cheeks, struggling to believe that the man who had taken her in truly meant his kindness. The rancher, too, wrestled with his thoughts. He had lived alone for so long that sharing his home with another person unsettled him. He worried he wasn't enough, that he didn't know how to care for a woman carrying a child, that one wrong step might drive her away. And deep inside, another fear lingered. Could he ever truly love a child that wasn't his blood? Despite these quiet battles, their days went on. She cooked and cared for the small garden behind the house. He continued working long hours in the fields. In public, however, whispers grew louder. When the rancher rode into town for supplies, he could hear them, the murmurs, the sidelong glances. Bought himself a woman, did he? She's pregnant, you know. Doesn't look like his. Strange, isn't it? A man that age taking in a girl like her. The rancher ignored them, his jaw set, but the words stuck like burrs in his skin. He hated the thought of her hearing such things. She had suffered enough without strangers adding to her shame. But one afternoon, when she insisted on accompanying him to town, the whispers reached her ears too. The way women eyed her belly, the way men smirked as she walked past, it was unbearable. She lowered her gaze, gripping the basket in her hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Back at the ranch, she finally broke. "Why did you do this?" she cried, her voice trembling with pain. "Now everyone thinks I'm nothing more than a burden you picked up from the dirt." The rancher stood stunned. He had no words at first, only the sting of knowing his attempt. To save her had unintentionally caused her more shame. Finally, he said quietly, "Let them think what they want. I don't care. You're not what they say you are." But she turned away, tears streaming down her face. I wish I could believe that. As if the weight of gossip wasn't enough, another storm soon arrived. The return of her mother. One evening, as the rancher was repairing the fence, a shadow appeared at the edge of his land. The older woman, sharp-eyed and greedy as ever, approached with a sly smile. "Well, well," she sneered. "Looks like you've made yourself comfortable with my daughter, but don't think she comes free. I raised her, fed her. You owe me more than what you paid." The rancher's blood boiled. "You sold her once. You'll get nothing more from me." Her mother's voice rose venomous. "She'll always be mine to trade. And you?" She jabbed a finger at him. "You're nothing but a fool who bought another man's problem." The young woman, hearing the shouts, came running. When she saw her mother standing there, her whole body shook. Memories of betrayal flooded back, and fear clutched her chest. But this time, something different happened. The rancher stepped forward, placing himself firmly between her and the older woman. "She's not yours anymore," he said, his voice low but unyielding. "She's under my protection now. You won't come near her again." The mother scoffed, cursing under her breath before storming off, but her words left a scar. That night the young woman sat by the fire, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "She'll only cause more trouble." The rancher looked at her steadily. "I'd do it again. Some things are worth protecting." Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment she saw not just a man who had rescued her, but someone willing to fight for her. The thought both warmed her heart and frightened her. Yet even as their bond deepened through struggle, the weight of uncertainty still hung heavy. Could they truly build a life together when the world seemed determined to tear them apart? Neither of them knew it yet, but the answer would come soon. On a stormy night when cries of pain would fill the ranch house, and with them the sound of a miracle. The summer heat had given way to restless winds. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, heavy with rain, and the air carried a tension that made both man and beast uneasy. The rancher worked late that evening, securing the barn doors against the storm. Inside the house, the young woman paced slowly, one hand gripping the table, the other pressed firmly against her belly. The child was restless, and so was she. By nightfall, the storm broke. Rain pounded the earth in furious sheets, thunder rolled over the plains, and lightning split the sky. The rancher returned, soaked through, just as he heard her cry out. He rushed inside to find her doubled over, her face pale, her breaths sharp and shallow. "It's time," she gasped, her voice trembling. The rancher's heart lurched. He had delivered calves, foals, even helped with lambs, but never a child. Yet there was no one else to call, no doctor within reach on such a stormy night, no neighbors near enough to help. It was just the two of them. "Breathe," he urged, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm here. I won't leave you." She clung to his arm as another wave of pain gripped her. Fear flashed in her eyes. "I can't do this, I can't." "Yes, you can," he said firmly, gripping her hand. "You're stronger than you know." Through the night, the storm raged on. The small house became a world of its own, filled with the sound of her cries and his quiet words of encouragement. He wiped the sweat from her brow, held her hand when she trembled, and never once let her feel alone. Hours passed. The storm outside began to fade, but inside the room, the struggle reached its peak. The young woman screamed, tears streaming down her face, every ounce of her strength poured into bringing new life into the world. The rancher's chest tightened. He wished he could take her pain, carry even a fraction of the burden. And then, at last it happened. A cry pierced the air, not of pain but of life. The rancher's eyes widened as he stared at the tiny, wriggling child in his trembling hands. For a long moment he was frozen, awestruck. The baby's voice rose strong, filling the house with a sound more beautiful than any music he had ever heard. He looked at the young woman, exhausted but smiling weakly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," he whispered. "He's here." She reached out her arms and he carefully placed the child against her chest. She held the baby, close, her lips brushing the tiny forehead, whispering words only a mother could say. The rancher stood beside her, unable to tear his eyes away. His heart swelled with something he had long believed was lost to him. Love, pure and overwhelming. The baby's small fingers curled tightly around his, and in that moment, the rancher felt the years of loneliness shatter. All the empty meals, the silent nights, the aching dreams, washed away by the tiny grip of a newborn hand. "He's beautiful," the young woman whispered, her voice breaking. The rancher nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Finally he managed, "He's a miracle." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and wonder. "You saved us. Both of us. I'll never forget that." But he shook his head. "No. You saved me." The storm outside eased into gentle rain, as though the heavens themselves had calmed to honor the moment. The house, once cold and empty, now glowed with warmth and new life. For the first time in years, the rancher sat at his table with more than one plate. For the first time, he heard not silence, but the soft coos of a baby and the gentle hum of a mother's lullaby. That night, as he watched over the sleeping pair, mother and child resting peacefully by the fire, he realized the truth. This was the family he had waited for. Not by blood, not by chance, but by the strange, winding path of fate, and he vowed silently and fiercely that he would spend the rest of his life protecting them. Morning came softly after the storm. The air smelled of fresh rain. The earth glistened under the rising sun, and birds sang as if welcoming new life into the world. Inside the small wooden house, everything felt different. The silence that had once weighed on the rancher's heart was gone, replaced by the gentle sounds of a newborn stirring and a mother humming quietly. The young woman cradled her baby by the fire, rocking him gently. Her eyes were tired, but they shone with a light the rancher had never seen before. She looked down at her child as though he were the only thing in the world that mattered, and for her he was. The rancher stood nearby, unsure of his place. He had delivered the child, held him first, but now he wondered if he belonged in their little circle. Would she still choose to stay, or would she eventually walk away, leaving him once again to an empty home? Sensing his hesitation, she looked up. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked softly. He froze, surprised by her offer. If you don't mind." She smiled, tired but genuine. "He's yours too. Not by blood, but by heart. You've already proven that." With trembling hands, the rancher took the baby, holding him against his chest. The tiny weight filled an emptiness inside him that he had carried for years. The child's warmth seeped into his soul, and he closed his eyes, whispering, "I'll protect you. Always." Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch found a new rhythm. The young woman grew stronger with each passing day, her laughter returning little by little. The baby's cries filled the house at night, but neither minded. The sound was a reminder that they were no longer alone. Together they worked side by side. She fed the chickens, rocked the baby on the porch, and tended the small garden. He repaired fences, cared for the cattle, and carried the child proudly in his arms when she needed rest. The townsfolk still whispered, but the rancher no longer cared. For every cruel word spoken in the market, there was a smile waiting for him back home, a smile that mattered far more. One afternoon, while hanging laundry in the yard, the young woman paused to watch the rancher playing with the baby. He held the child high in the air, his deep laugh echoing across the land. It was the first time she realized he wasn't just giving her and the baby shelter. He was giving them love. Real, unconditional love. She wiped her hands on her apron and whispered to herself, This is home." That evening after dinner, as the baby slept peacefully in his cradle, she turned to the rancher. Her voice shook, but her words were steady. I never thought I'd say this, but thank you for saving me, for saving him, for giving us a family." The rancher looked at her, his eyes soft. "You don't owe me thanks. You've given me more than I ever dreamed of. For years I thought I'd die alone, with nothing but this land to my name. But now—" He glanced at the baby, then back at her. "Now I have everything I ever wanted." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow this time. They were tears of healing, of finally feeling safe, wanted, and loved. That night, as the stars stretched across the sky, the rancher sat on the porch with the baby sleeping in his arms. The young woman leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Together they watched the horizon, a quiet peace settling over them. The ranch, once known for its loneliness, had become a place of warmth and life. The man who had lived in silence now had laughter to fill his days. The woman who had been betrayed now had someone who would never abandon her. And the child, born into hardship, would grow up surrounded by the love of two hearts that had once been broken, now mended together. The rancher closed his eyes, breathing in the moment. This was his miracle, the one he had waited for, prayed for, and finally found. Not in the way he expected, but in the way he needed most. Because family, he realized, isn't defined by blood. It is built by love, by sacrifice, and by the choice to stay when the rest of the world walks away. And with that truth burning steady in his heart, the lonely rancher was lonely no more.